America will lead New World Order, says Joe Biden, as you can see from the headline on the Drudge Report on March 22nd, 2022. And the actual quote, as you can see in the article on Real Clear Politics, is now is the time when things are shifting and there's going to be a New World Order out there and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it, the left-right paradigm being symbolized by Ammon and Moab, in my opinion, which is for the most part controlled by the Kenites on the unipolar end of the globalist spectrum, and Edom, which means red, is controlled by the Kenites on the multipolar end of the globalist spectrum. As Christ says in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, nation shall rise against nation, meaning the Kenite nation rising up against itself within the shadow government thereof, which is symbolized by the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, with the great horn of the he-goat being, in my opinion, the United Nations, which is also the one who sends a raiser of taxes in Daniel 11:20 when you properly translate the verse. The subject there isn't the raiser of taxes, but rather the one who sends the raiser of taxes, which is the Paris Climate Agreement according to the Daniel 11 hypothesis on biblicalresearchlabs.com. The Paris Climate Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the one who sent the Paris Climate Accord, which is the raiser of taxes, is the United Nations. The subject of Daniel 11:20 and the great horn of the he-goat that must first be broken before the so-called New World Order will come into being. And not only did we see an article saying the United Nations may collapse like the League of Nations back in February, but another article titled What Putin's Ukraine Crisis Proves About the Dying United Nations not only went down the list of what the Trump administration did to undermine the UN system, including pulling out of the United Nations Human Rights Council and defunding the UN Reliefs and Works Agency, but the article also claims U.S. diplomats have told UN officials that Biden does not envision a UN-centric world order. And remember, all the way back in 1950, John Foster Dulles, who would go on to become Eisenhower's Secretary of State, said the United Nations represents not a final stage in the development of world order, but only a primitive stage. So then if the United Nations is the great horn of the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, then there will be no new world order, as it's called, until the United Nations system is broken and Satan and his angels get cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet. That's when the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8 will become the leopard of Daniel chapter 7, symbolic of the Kenites and their four hidden dynasties. And that's also when the lion and the bear of Daniel chapter 7 will come into being, which are symbolic of the Christian nations and the Ezekiel 38 confederacy. But then 2.5 months later, the Christian nations will become non-Christian nations also when they worship Satan instead of Christ when he appears in Jerusalem at the woe of the sixth trumpet, beginning the final 2.5 months or 70 evenings the 70 years in captivity to the Babylon of old were a type of.